Hey, welcome to Molecular Recycling 101. My name is Paula Luu. I'm a Senior Project Director at the Center for Circular Economy within Close Loop Partners. So I'm thrilled to be part of Unpacked this year and looking forward to digging into molecular recycling, what it is and what you should know. A little bit of background on Close Loop Partners. We are an investment firm and innovation center based in New York City. Our capital stack or asset management ranges from ventures all the way through private equity. And within our Center for Circular Economy, we are working with Fortune 100 companies to address material challenges, supply chain bottlenecks that are limiting the processing and circularity of different packaging materials. It's also where our R&D on molecular recycling has focused in the last 3 years. And so in 2018, our firm launched the Advancing Circular Systems for Plastics initiative. This is an initiative that spans the entire firm and brings together different parts of our asset management and R&D teams to research, test, and scale the different solutions that are solving for different kinds of plastics waste in our system. Related to molecular recycling, also known as chemical recycling or maybe advanced recycling, if those are more familiar terms that you're using, we have launched 2 reports over the last 3 years. In 2019, we launched a landscape report that really highlights the market opportunities within the US and Canada. And then in 2021, just a couple of months ago, we launched a deep dive to evaluate the financial viability, the environmental, the human health impacts of different kinds of technologies, as well as answer key questions to how do these different kinds of technologies fit within a circular plastics system. So I'm excited to be presenting some key findings from across those 2 reports. And you can certainly dig into the details by downloading the reports on our website. So for today's talk, it's a quick one, but I wanted to walk you through 10 takeaways from our research in this field over the last 4 years. So what is molecular recycling? It's not a monolith. It's really a diverse set of technologies that are leveraging either solvents or heat or enzymes, even sound waves to purify and break down different kinds of plastic waste. There are 3 types of technologies within the sector: purification, which produces polymers; depolymerization, which produces monomers; and conversion technologies, which produce hydrocarbon products like naphtha or diesel or paraffin waxes. For each of these categories of technologies, they usually take in different kinds of inputs and are creating a diverse set of outputs. I've got a graphic that illustrates that. So here is a graphic from our latest report. It includes mechanical recycling as well as the 3 categories of molecular recycling, and is a flow chart of the different kinds of inputs that can feasibly be processed through these different kinds of recycling technologies, as well as the outputs that are produced by each recycling system. As you can see, not all of these material flows are at the same level of maturity, but the key takeaway here is that by pairing mechanical recycling with molecular recycling, we really have an opportunity to expand the scope of plastic waste that we can recycle beyond packaging, because packaging really only makes up 30% of the plastic that is produced. Molecular recycling, to understand its fullest potential, we should be mapping it out to sort of how it can be processing automotive waste, construction waste, agricultural waste, municipal waste with plastic in it, even wind turbines. I think that is really the biggest opportunity for us as infrastructure investors, as we think about what it will truly take to create a fully circular plastics economy, because plastic packaging is just a sliver of that waste. So molecular recycling is really only one part of a suite of upstream and downstream solutions. The more that we dug into this sector, the more we recognize that to fully decarbonize our plastics economy, we need to be taking advantage and investing in and scaling both upstream and downstream solutions. Of course, molecular recycling or advanced recycling presents opportunities to expand those plastic waste materials that do exist in our system, but it's not a silver bullet, and we should also be looking at design, innovation, reuse, and refill systems as a way to mitigate our plastic waste. So where is molecular recycling uniquely positioned in the market? When we began to investigate sort of the gap between the supply and the demand for high quality resins, what we found was that mechanical recycling alone is not likely to fill that gap. The graphic that you see on the right side of this screen is the demand and the projected, or the real or projected supply of food grade packaging across different resins through 2023. This is data from Wood Mackenzie's Material and Applications platform in 2021. The key difference between molecular recycling and mechanical recycling is that because it is working at the molecular level, it is thermodynamically resetting the polymer through various different types of technology platforms, as we discussed, and it allows for the polymer to stay at its highest value. Said another way, it is only focusing on creating virgin-like polymers, and we can add different colors and additives to meet functional performance, and it is uniquely positioned to support mechanical recycling in filling that gap between the demand and supply for high-quality resins like food-grade plastics. When we looked across the suite of technologies, so that's purification, depolymerization, and conversion technologies, we looked across different environmental key performance indicators. Here, I've listed energy, the climate impact potential, or the CO2e, and blue water, which is the water that's used within the process. What we found that on average, purification tended to mitigate the most energy, carbon, and water impacts when you compare that to producing the same amount of plastic through the virgin plastic system. Second was depolymerization, and third was conversion. There were strong performers in each of the categories listed here. So we evaluated 2 purification technologies, 4 depolymerization, and 3 conversion. And this table simply represents a summary and the average and range that we observed across these key metrics. I think a clear takeaway from the environmental impact production is that these 3 categories of technologies are producing a different kind of plastic resin for the most part compared to mechanical, but they do use a lot more energy than mechanical. So pairing the 2 systems, mechanical and molecular recycling, is what's going to be the most strategic way to decarbonize our plastics economy, while also creating the supplies of recycled plastic that the market needs today. Diligence to make sure that we're scaling the most sustainable solutions in the market are extremely important, because as you can see, this early stage sector showed variability even amongst the categories that we evaluated, as indicated by the ranges here. So another important context to be thinking about is how much plastic resin can we be making through these new supply chains with molecular recycling embedded in. So our team looked at sort of the mass balance yields across the entire system, looking at purification, depolymerization, and conversion, and comparing that to the mechanical recycling system. As you can see in the middle of this bubble graph, we have the same 1,000 kilograms put into the reactor. And because these technologies have different kinds of supply chains, which are directly correlated with the kinds of outputs that they're producing. Purification produces polymers, so it produces a finished resin. Depolymerization, unless it's vertically integrated, will produce monomers that will have to be repolymerized into a polymer again. Conversion produces hydrocarbon products that have to be cracked and then put through the petrochemical supply chain to produce polyolefins like polypropylene and polyethylene. And because these supply chains have different lengths, if you will, to get back to the plastic polymer, there are different mass yields. Unsurprisingly, from a mass perspective, the shorter the route back to the plastic pellet, the more mass that you're able to maintain, or the more recycled plastic you have. It's directly correlated to the kinds of feedstock that these technologies can take in. Since purification and depolymerization often, but not always, take in single resin inputs, which require sortation and processing to get down to one single kind of plastic feedstock. Conversion takes in a mixed plastic waste, and so through that process, and because of the supply chain that it goes through, you're yielding a smaller quantity of finished resin by the end of the value chain. And compared to compared to mechanical recycling, the yields between purification and mechanical are quite similar. So the next slide that I want to focus on is sort of the viability, the financial viability. Again, we looked at purification, depolymerization, and conversion as part of our latest study. And what we found is, when we priced the outputs of their technologies, be it polymers, be it monomers, or hydrocarbon products, the market prices of 2021 yielded much stronger return on investments or expected IRRs. And that's relatively true for most categories with the exception of depolymerization. 2019 market prices where, oil was a lot cheaper, yielded lower IRRs. And so the key takeaway here is that, there were viable and investable opportunities in each category that we observed. High variability on depolymerization, but understanding the ability for the sector to curate new commodity prices based on the value proposition to a sustainable economy is going to be really critical for its financial success in the market and for investors who are looking to scale these technologies. So, there are trade-offs with everything, and certainly within molecular recycling, the trade-offs that we observed from a commercial maturity and availability perspective all the way through sort of the mass yields and environmental impacts, all have to do or are all correlated, along sort of the feedstock requirements, the efficiency of these different technologies, and each technology's financial performance. When we looked at what was the most financially viable kind of system to pair with mechanical recycling, what we found was that a mix of these technologies was really the best solution. There's an entire case study in our 2021 report that's focused on, how do we get to a 30% packaging recycling rate within the United States and Canada? And we found that a mixed technology approach that paired mechanical with conversion, with purification and depolymerization optimized from an environmental standpoint, could generate up to $970 million per year, and double the amount of plastic packaging that we recycle today. So there's certainly, a financial opportunity. There's an environmental opportunity on the table, and no one clear winner. Really a mixed technology approach to kind of deal with the variability of plastics and diversity of plastics in the system, as well as kind of matching different technologies with different levels of infrastructure development across the market is what's going to yield us the best results. And so this is an incredibly nuanced sector, and we recognize the challenge of even, understanding the opportunities, risks, and benefits of one technology category, let alone three. And so what Closed Partners did, again, in our 2021 report, was to put together a checklist of questions that investors or potential brand companies interested in evaluating a particular company or the sector can be asking during an evaluation period. The questions fall under four categories, focused on technology viability, the financial viability of certain models and technologies, the environmental and human health impacts, as well as local market integration. So it is a complex process, and one that is very technical, but hopefully facilitated by tools and resources that we've developed within our firm. And the last two things that I'll leave you with is sort of what can I do? So from a brand perspective, I think recognizing that this is an early stage sector that is ultimately going to be supported through policy, that's going to be supported through stabilizing the demand for recycled plastics, establishing new commodity prices based on the sort of novel products, the recycled products that these technologies are producing. These are all things, and investing not only on the technology, but also within the supply chain and upstream from the technology, which all of the technology categories in this sector require some level of pre-processing in order to optimize outputs and its quality. That investment and sort of the contracts, long-term contracts that brands can do, stabilize and help these companies secure, more sustainable financing, which is incredibly important during sort of this tumultuous time with inflation. And it's about really partnering along that value chain for us to understand how we can source, again, not only plastic packaging to process, but the many diverse forms of plastic waste in our system, everything from textiles to agricultural films or durable plastics that are left over from construction and demolition. These are really the biggest opportunities from our perspective. And then for policymakers, a lot of the, similar to the solar industry, I think if we can provide financing or tax breaks for those technology companies that guarantee linkages to create plastics to plastics or plastic to product outcomes. Again, we don't consider plastics to fuel recycling within Closed Partners, but policy will play a really important role to create the incentives to scale what's most circular, as well as the guardrails to make sure that we are not sort of scaling these technologies to further linear outcomes that we're observing in other markets like Europe. Setting these two stakeholder groups also have a role to play in sort of setting what success looks like for the sector. As you can see from the environmental kind of impact summary table a couple of slides back, there is we haven't defined what success looks like, but how we scale these different types of technology solutions within the molecular recycling sector will ultimately be determined by, what we think is acceptable from a material processing yield or an environmental footprint perspective. And so honest and specific conversations about the technology sector is necessary. And I personally believe that our ability to have those discussions, being very specific about either a technology category or a specific type of technology, will really expedite sort of the future of the sector. We can't be talking about the sector as a monolith because it's far too complex and nuanced and potentially counterproductive if we continue to sort of speak about these technologies as a monolith. So with that, thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of today. I look forward to your questions and speak to you in a little bit.